I want to take a few minutes to introduce myself to you more formally or maybe more informally. I'm having internet issues as I record this, so my captioning is not working correctly, which is awesome. Oh, there we go. So let me try that again. Actually, let me pause and start over. I want to take a few minutes just to introduce myself to you, like I would do the first few minutes of in-person class. Unlike most of my videos, this is completely optional. If you've gotten here and you're like, no, that's fine. I won't be offended. My name's Carlin, like you know, I think. I was born and raised in Minnesota. I was raised actually in a small town in east central Minnesota, Bruno. Bruno has around 100 people in it. As I was growing up, it is about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of Minneapolis, about an hour south of Duluth, off of Interstate 35. I went to school at Bruno Elementary School, which has since closed. My sixth grade class had about 36 students in it, and that was the only section. So that gives an idea of the size. It certainly isn't the smallest elementary school in Minnesota. I know that almost certainly some of you or some of your friends may have had graduating classes of 20 or smaller even, but it was relatively small, and has since merged with another district and so on and so forth. I wanted to be an elementary teacher all of my life. I wanted to teach fifth grade especially, and so I was an elementary education major at the University of Wisconsin-Superior, and I also realized I prefer teaching a little bit older students. And so I got a middle school social studies endorsement at the same time. At that institution, you had to have an endorsement in something else. If you were an elementary ed major, you were not allowed to graduate with only an elementary ed degree. You needed a teachable minor, which was social studies for me. So I taught elementary school for 4 years. I taught fifth grade for a year, and then I taught sixth grade and was also a grades 3 through 6 computer teacher. I taught both in Las Vegas, Nevada, and then in Eagle Butte, South Dakota, which is on the Cheyenne River Lakota Reservation. I enjoyed elementary school, but I also realized it probably wasn't where I wanted to spend my life. The thing about elementary school I realized is that it's you and the students all day long, and that's great when the students are great and you're great, and it's really not great necessarily if not everything is going great. And that's one of the reasons, as well as really liking middle school, that I switched to middle school. So I moved to Wichita, Kansas, and I taught middle school there for 5 years. And I taught a variety of subjects. I taught English, or language arts. I taught social studies, specifically geography. I taught math, and I taught AVID. And AVID is a potentially awesome program that is focused on college readiness for students who are both in the academic middle. In other words, those students who don't receive special education services, they don't receive gifted services, they are just sort of middle of the road students, and who with support can do really well in honors classes or in AP classes in high school. And it's also geared towards students who are going to be first generation college students or who are from underrepresented groups in higher education, whether that be in terms of ethnicity or race, or whether it be in terms of socioeconomic status. And AVID can be a really good program. And it was pretty good when I taught it there. And then I went to high school, and I taught at the high school for 6 years, and I taught history, I taught English, and I taught math. And so although I was an elementary education major, along the way I went back to school and I added additional endorsements. So in Kansas and in North Dakota and other states, many other states, you can add endorsements just by taking a test once you have a license, unlike in Minnesota. However, I took enough classes along the way and did enough so that in Minnesota right now, I'm licensed not just for elementary ed and middle school social studies, but also for secondary social studies, for middle and secondary school math, and for secondary, which is grades 5 through 12, as you probably know, communication, arts, and literature, also known as English. So if higher ed doesn't work out, I'll go back in the classroom, maybe after COVID. And one reason I did that is that I get really bored teaching the same thing over and over again. One of the most boring years of my professional life was when I was teaching middle school and I was teaching 7th grade world geography, and that was all I taught. I had, I don't know, 6 sections, something like that, of 7th grade world geography, and it was so, for me, boring. I like variety. I like a lot of variety. And so that's one reason why I tend to sort of go from place to place. I moved to higher ed full-time back in 2012. And since then, this is my 10th year teaching in higher education full-time. I've also been an adjunct teaching various sort of gen ed classes, or lib ed classes we call them here, in English and history and geography. I taught math at a community college in Iowa for 2 years. And then I spent most of the time that was been in teacher education programs, a lot like Bemidji State's, at smaller institutions. Even though BSU is the smallest Minnesota State institution, it is larger by quite a bit than any of the other schools I've been at. I taught at McPherson College, which is a small private college in central Kansas. It has about 600 students in it. I taught there for 5 years, and then I taught at Dickinson State in southwestern North Dakota. And Dickinson State has maybe 3,000 students, something like that. I taught there for 2 years. And this, like I said, is my first year at BSU. One of the reasons I'm teaching this class is one of my master's degrees is in special education. It actually has, my concentration in it is actually gifted education. We'll talk about gifted education in a few weeks, and we'll talk about it along the way ahead of then too. I have a lot to say about gifted education, and I do want you to know that you are going to hear me at times in the presentations get on my soapbox. You do not have to agree with me when I get on my soapbox. If there's something I say that I think it's important, like that's a fact that you need to agree with, I will tell you that. This is a fact. This is not an opinion. But you're obviously free to disagree with my opinions. That is healthy. But I hope that I will, over the course of the semester, convince you of the importance of differentiating for all of your students, whether they are students who struggle in school or students who excel in school. And I hope I will teach you the importance to be an advocate for your students. And I think I'll save that story for a non-optional video because it's a good one. Those of you who have me for a methods class will hear me say it in methods this semester as well, because it's one of my favorite stories. So that's a little preview of things to come. So that's sort of me academically. I should say that my areas of interest, in addition to gifted education, are math education, social studies education, particularly history and geography, and middle school education. I know a few of you have me for middle school methods in the fall. In addition to my graduate work in special ed or gifted ed, I also did graduate work in instructional design and technology, which is sort of like educational technology, but combined with, it's not really lesson planning, but it's kind of lesson planning. It's a little hard to describe, but instructional design is basically just what it says, designing instruction. And that could be designing instruction in an elementary school or a middle school or a high school or a college, but it could also be designing instruction for industry or healthcare, anywhere where people need to learn something or employees need to be trained, anything like that is instructional design. And I have a master's in library science, which seemed like a good idea at the time, and one in history because I love history. My PhD is in leadership with a concentration in mathematics, and I'm currently working on a PhD in history, as well as finishing up another master's degree in religious studies. So all this is to partially say both a little bit more about me, and also, like many of you, I am juggling work and school. So I am aware of the constraints that you have on your time, and I hope to use your time wisely in this class. I will say that one thing that one of my undergrad professors said that I think is really true, and that is true for education classes especially, is that you get out of a class what you put into it. And by that what I mean is that if you can, in an online class, sometimes skate by, and you just go through enough hoops that you get whatever grade you want, and maybe that grade is a B, which is a perfectly honorable grade. But you aren't going to get the same amount of it if you put forth some effort. You get out of a class what you put into it. I also recognize that you are juggling multiple classes this semester, almost certainly. And this is a class, is an online class that the college standard is you should expect to spend about 9 hours a week on an online class. Why that number? This is a 3-credit class, so that would be 3 hours if it were an in-person class. And then the rule of thumb is 2 hours outside of class for every hour inside of class. So that's another 6 hours. Now, I don't think it will usually take you 9 hours a week on this class, so I don't want you to panic. But I do want you to recognize that at times it may. And some of the things we're doing in the second half of the semester are a little more in-depth assignments. And so there are things that you cannot do in a half hour or an hour. On the other hand, there will be assignments that you could definitely do in a half hour or an hour. So just be aware. I'll talk about reading too a little bit, even though this is optional, I guess. For the reading assignments in our books in this class, I would encourage you to read ahead. So on a week when you don't have a lot to do, pick up the classroom management book, which we're covering the second half, and start reading it early. I think it's a good book. I think it's a worthwhile book. I think it's a thought-provoking book, which is why I chose it. But because we're doing so much with differentiation and exceptionalities, we don't have tons of time to spend on classroom management. And so I've tried to spread out that reading a little bit in the last 5 weeks of class or so. But there are 6 chapters, so you might want to start on that early. You might find it interesting. As always, if you have questions, please contact me. I would gladly help as best I can. I guess personally about me, as I mentioned, first year in Bemidji, single, no pets. I'm not allowed pets with my lease. I would love to have a dog, but that will have to wait until the future. In my free time, I don't have tons of free time between work and school, just like you, but I like playing video and computer games, especially strategy and role-playing games. I like reading, especially when I'm not taking classes. I like reading science fiction, fantasy, and history, but a little bit of everything else, from linguistics to math to just sort of random stuff. When I have lots of time, I like getting in the car and just driving, nothing like a road trip, especially in spring or summer. But that usually doesn't happen while I'm teaching and taking classes. It's a little bit about me personally. Hope you have a great semester. Again, if I can help, please reach out. Take care, and I'll see you later.